Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our next series of the digital transformation series of the Data Science Institute. My name is Jan-Willem Middelburg, and I'm going to be your host today. And for today, we're going to be focusing on a topic that is very close to my heart, and that is how to drive digital enterprise transformation with robotic process automation. I promise this is going to be a very fun and engaging session. And throughout this next 40 minutes, we're going to see how RPA is transforming the way organizations operate. Before we get started, let's discuss a few things around the logistics. First, note that this session today is being recorded, and that if you are invited to ask your questions online, that your voice will be recorded as well. We strongly encourage you to ask questions throughout the entire session, and we have a Q&A box available on the left-hand side of the screen. So if you are able to pose your questions into the Q&A box, and then other participants can upvote or downvote the questions, and we will moderate these towards the end. And then last but not least, everyone who is joining today will also get a link towards the PowerPoint slides. So there's no need to make screenshots or photos during the session, because all live participants will receive a complete copy of today's presentation. So that's a little bit around the logistics. Let me start off with doing a very brief introduction of myself. My name is Jan-Willem Middelburg. I'm the director at Sapiens and the president of the Data Science Institute, which is hosting this series of webinars this year. I do a lot of lecturing, teaching, and helping clients on their digital transformation journeys. And if I'm not doing any of that, I'm also an avid writer. On the screen in front of you, you see some of the books that I've written over the years. And today we're going to focus on one of my earliest publications, which is the Service Automation Framework, which is the book that you see all the way at the left. And this forms the basis for transformation of automation services within organizations. So today, I'll cover a few of the key topics that are included in this publication. Today's session is brought to you by the Data Science Institute, which is an independent body of knowledge for the development and advancements of data best practices. DASCIN is known for its education, certification, and knowledge schemes, which enables governments and individuals to make better decisions through data. The Data Science Institute has around a dozen of different certification programs, which are internationally considered at the top of the credentials that you can obtain in data. And if you have any questions around that, I strongly recommend you check out the website at dascin.org. Where you will be able to find a lot of information around the knowledge programs that are available, as well as the certifications. Good, that's a little bit of the intro. Today, we're going to focus on a number of very, very interesting topics. And we're going to get started with a brief introduction towards automation and RPA, and specifically how RPA works within enterprise organizations. I always like to go a little bit deeper in these kinds of sessions than just, I would say, the definitions and the things that you can easily find. So I'm going to focus also a bit on how it works under the hood. So how workflows are invoked, how they're orchestrated, what are the key elements that you would need to set up for RPA solutions to work in an enterprise environment. And then thirdly, I'm going to cover one of the main topics I think that is on almost every IT executive's agenda these days is agentic AI. And within the domain of RPA, we refer to this as agentic automation. So we're going to see how that differs from traditional automation and how it's also what are some of the key characteristics on agentic automation. And last but not least, I'm going to end with a brief explanation of the RPA Foundation certification, what it is, and how you can learn more about any of the topics that we're covering today. So I have a very full program for discussion. At any moment, if you have questions, again, please don't forget to put them into the chat. But let's get started with some of the most fundamental basics. And I always like to start a discussion around automation with a guy that knows a thing or two about automation. Obviously, the co-founder of Microsoft, that has a very famous quote that says, "The first rule of any technology used in business is that automation applied to an efficient operation will magnify the efficiency, whereas the second rule is that automation applied to an inefficient operation will magnify the inefficiency." Now, you might wonder why I start our presentation today with this quote. The reason why I always like to start with this is to trigger your mind a little bit, because automation for the sake of automation is not a goal in itself. Organizations that just want to jump on the bandwagon of automation typically leads towards projects that are not delivering true business value in the long run. Automation effectively is about process optimization and making sure that over time you are able to speed up the efficiency of your processes. And that first and foremost means that you need to have good processes in the first place. If you're introducing automation to an inefficient process, on the other hand, it will just increase the clutter. It will make things even slower or more complex. And that's something that we would like to avoid. Now, why is this important? It means that although we will definitely need technology in order to drive this forward, the critical skill of automation is knowledge, process design, and being able to convert business processes into robot processes. And that's a very, very critical aspect to take into account, and also one of the most difficult parts in any automation type of project. Ultimately, this is really a people and human-centered approach, and having good understanding of process optimization will lead towards more efficient kind of processes. Now, RPA in itself is not something that is significantly new. Process automation has been around for decades, and robotic process automation has already been there since early 2010s. Where the first tools and software systems started to rise that were able to do this kind of automation technology. However, what is new in the last few years is the inclusion of agentic and AI capabilities, and that's exactly what we're going to talk about today a little bit more, because that enables any organization to do AI and automation at a scale that we've never seen before. Now, before we get started, it's also important to note that there's no single authority when it comes towards RPA or automation. We generally like to say that the whole RPA domain consists of a collective body of knowledge. And what we mean with that is that it's a domain that has evolved by many different stakeholders, by many different people, researchers, companies, universities, and key authority leaders within that field. And that's something that I personally very much like, because it really means that the domain of automation RPA is completely vendor independent. There's no one authority or one company that claims to have all of the knowledge in place. And by combining a lot of different best practices, you're able to drive things forward quicker. And that's exactly what we're going to show you a little bit today around some of the blueprints and some of the elements that are a part of that. On the next screen, you can kind of see some of the major contributors. So you see some of the very famous books around automation. You see some contributors in terms of conferences. You see webinars, just like the one we're hosting today. But basically, there's a lot of different people and organizations that are contributing their time and their efforts towards evolving automation best practice. And that's also something that I personally very much like. It's this ongoing collective of people and organizations that really drive this forward. Now, why is this an important aspect to take into consideration? It's primarily because RPA and automation and intelligent automation solutions in general solve real-world business problems. And one of the most interesting use cases that automation solutions are used for are to create what we refer to as high-performing back offices. Back offices are characterized by the fact that they need to process a lot of repetitive processes over a period of time. And by using RPA solutions, you can streamline this, you can do it more quickly and more efficiently. Now, in order to use that, it's very, very critical that you start to understand, first and foremost, what RPA can do, but also what its limitations are. We will very quickly see in today's session that RPA is very, very useful for a lot of process-oriented solutions, but that it has much more difficulty when it comes towards creative or reasoning kind of decisions. So those are key elements to take into considerations. So it starts today with having a bit of understanding and a bit of knowledge, and I hope that after today's session, at least you will have a better picture and a better understanding of what RPA is able to solve and resolve, and what are the key elements that you might want to put in another kind of solution. Now, I just mentioned the high-performing back offices, and any large organization that exists anywhere in the world will have back office processes. Think about finance processes, supply chain, marketing, HR. And the thing that all of these back offices have in common is that they very frequently execute a lot of very similar processes. In the finance department, you can obviously think about purchase to pay processes. You can think about invoicing processes or expense processes. In the HR part, you can think about onboarding employees, offboarding employees. You can think about performance review processes, etc. Now, the question with those back offices is, how do you make them high performance? And based on the research, high performance back offices have 5 key elements in common. They're centralized, meaning that they are into specific units. Typically, there's a high level of standardization to make sure that things are done in a consistent manner. They are typically optimized to ensure that no unnecessary steps are taken. And then the last 2 points are the most critical ones for today's session, is that they are technology enabled and automated. And this is exactly where RPA plays a very, very fundamental role. It's a key driver for making sure that organizations can achieve those high performing back offices. If you have standardized, repetitive kinds of processes and you do them in an automated manner, you're able to process much more work than if you were to do that manually. So we'll see today a little bit on how that is going to work out. Now, before we dive into the way that this is structured, let's very briefly dive into what we actually mean when we talk about RPA. For the sake of today's session, I've used one of the most common definitions, which is coming from the Electronics Standards Association, which states that RPA is a pre-configured software instance that uses business rules and predefined activity choreography to complete the autonomous execution of a combination of processes, activities, transactions, and tasks in one or more unrelated software systems to deliver results or services with human exception management. And it's important to note this for a particular couple of reasons. First and foremost, note that when we are talking about RPA, we are talking about pre-configured software instances. And that generally means that this is available off the shelf. You can use standardized software packages like UiPath, Automation Anywhere, Power Automate, and you would need to configure those towards the requirements of your organization. So there's no need to code things from scratch. You can, in most of these solutions, use drag and drop and configuration exercises to deploy your processes. Now, one of the main things that we are going to do in this whole process is model organizational processes. And organizational processes are very much dependent on specific triggers. They follow specific business rules. And we generally like to say that there is a predefined activity choreography. So even if there are considerations or decisions along a business process, we can still model that process, and a lot of the workflows will be very similar in nature. And that's exactly what we're trying to mimic within an RPA environment. Now, last but not least, I also would like to turn your attention to the words unrelated software systems. And that means that you can think about RPA as a layer across your existing application landscape that can interact with all of the other applications that your organization is using. And this is important because it means you don't need to make complex integrations. You don't need to change any of your underlying business applications. It's just about making sure that your other business applications can interact with the robots and the workflow engines in the backend. Now, I always like to start with this because it will give you quite a good understanding of why this is necessary, but also to get everyone on the same page what we actually mean when we talk about RPA going forward. Now that we've seen this definition, note that the term itself can sometimes be a little bit misleading. So just for clarification and to kind of repeat this one more time, when we're talking about RPA, we're talking about software and software robots. RPA has nothing to do with the physical robots I'm showing you on the screen. That's the world of robotics and not RPA. Robotics is at mechanical processes. And even though we could probably use RPA to guide or give instructions to physical robots, the domains are quite significantly different. So RPA in itself is a software-based solution. It's configured and installed, and the workflows are typically designed within a computer screen as well. So that means that it's a non-tangible kind of asset. A lot of this confusion is coming from the vendor community. It's very common that organizations, and you might have heard this, are saying things like we have 7 or 8 robots running. And obviously that does not mean that they have 7 or 8 physical robots running around their office. It actually means that they are subscribing to 7 or 8 software licenses. So what most of the RPA vendors are doing is that they are pricing and licensing based on capacity or workloads. And therefore, you generally see this kind of terminology. So sometimes this adds a bit to the confusion. So what that means is that if an organization says that we have 8 robots running, it basically means that they have subscribed to 8 licenses or robot instances. And that's really the way that you should be looking at this. So to summarize a little bit, before we dive into some of the more technical aspects, RPA is the technology that enables you to create workflows. And it's a software system with which we can model or mimic what people are doing behind the computer. and transform that into executable workflows that can subsequently repeat that task. Now, why do I specifically say the words mimic human actions? Is we will try to follow and repeat the steps that you take behind the computer as well. And the things that most people are doing behind the computer is either they're typing something, they are moving with their mouse to click on certain aspects, or they are getting information back from their computer screens. And it's exactly those key steps that are the basis of what we are trying to model in RPA workflows. And we'll see this in a second on how that works in practice. So making sure that we define this, that we establish this, is really one of the most critical aspects to take into consideration. Now, I'm going to also dive slightly deeper today. So I promise this is the only slide that is slightly more technical, and that explains the solution architecture that is underneath the hood. And I'm going to start on the right-hand side, which is the elements that most people are actually seeing. And that is that I'm going to be discussing this from a user kind of perspective. Most organizations have different kinds of roles of people that interact with RPA solutions. And for the sake of simplicity today, I've just divided that into developers and business users. The developers are the people that are working to configure workflows, and the business users are the ones that will need to work with the outcomes or the results from those processes. So to separate that a little bit, think about a developer as somebody that is, let's say, within the IT department and that is configuring these kinds of solutions. And a business user could be somebody from the finance department that would need to, let's say, process invoices or execute another financial process. Now, I'm going to start with the RPA developer. The RPA developer is typically tasked with creation and establishing the workflows necessary to operate. And in order to do that, RPA developers will create workflows, typically in some kind of a workflow designer. And in order to speed up the process, they generally use plugins, recorders, and in the last 1 or 2 years, AI components with which they can speed up the development of these workflows. Together, you see a big red circle around it. We refer to this as the robot design activities. And these are the elements that are typically part of the robot designer. Different tools and different vendors use different terminology for this, but the main point here is that all of the activities that an RPA developer interacts with is typically to configure and establish their workflows. Now, once those workflows have been established, they need to be launched and they need to be put into a production environment. And that's where Control Center comes in. In Control Center, we have robots that are scheduled to do specific tasks, and that will divide work between the number of robots in an organization. So through Control Center, we basically manage two main things. We manage orchestration and the number of robots that are actually executing work at any given time. And we manage the runtime applications, or what we refer to as the robot runners, that actually execute the work. You can think about orchestration as a higher level that ultimately gives the commands to the runtime application and vice versa. The runtime application additionally also interacts with other data sources within the organization. So you will see that here it goes back and forth between an organization's standard enterprise IT environment and back towards the runtime application back and forth. Now, this picture is a high-level part or a high-level overview of how RPA actually works underneath the hood. And what I'd like you to really see right here is that the architecture in itself is quite simplistic, but you do need to set up a few components for RPA solutions to actually run. The other main thing that I would like you to see is that here on the left-hand side, you see the AI library. And in order to use AI within a automation environment, we generally use predefined models like large language models or like OCR scanners that we can invoke through standardized actions and standardized workflow activities. So that's where our AI fits within the bigger picture of an RPA solution. Good. I hope that kind of helps you to understand this a little bit deeper and a little bit more in detail. What I'm going to do next is dive into that last part a little bit, because obviously the main conversation these days is all about AI, and you have probably heard about agentic AI and AI kinds of solutions. So I thought it would be useful for today's session to kind of paint a bit of a picture on what agentic AI is actually all about, but also how it is different from RPA now that you have a little bit more knowledge around what that is actually doing. And the analogy I always like to start with when we talk about agentic AI is the analogy of the brain. You might or might not know that the human brain is subdivided into two components. And if you look at it from the front part of the brain, we actually have a right and a left-hand side. And the right-hand side is responsible for what we generally like to call logical reasoning. So this is the area with which you're making decisions, in which you are processing facts or information, the area where you reason, where you do your maths, and really internalize knowledge. The left-hand side of your brain, on the other hand, is focused around doing creative work. So this part is focused around intuition, it's focused around insights, arts, emotions, things like music, is processed by this side of the brain. Now, what we are doing in agentic solutions is that we are combining the process-oriented workflows, which are typically rule-based and are executed by robots, and we are combining these with decision-making and the more creative aspects, which is done by agents. And that's what you see on the right-hand side. So if you kind of put this into a math equation to kind of make it interesting for the people who are very much focused around the left-hand side of their brain, is that it's a very simple equation, is that using traditional RPA workflows, but including components from generative AI, leads towards agentic automation. And with these agents, we can process workflows, but we can also process decision-making capabilities. And that's really one of the critical differences between RPA and agentic AI, is that the robots and the workflows can now include reasoning steps. And in traditional and more rule-based kinds of approaches, this was previously not possible. I always like to illustrate a little bit more with an example. So if you look at the way that agentic AI has been evolving in the last few years, you can basically divide it into three main steps. RPA, which we've covered in the first part of the webinar, is this more traditional rule-based kind of approach. And you can see here on the screen that it has a start. It will then execute a few actions. We can have splits or if-else kinds of situations. But it's a relatively rule-based system. It means it's deterministic in nature and will always give you the same outputs every time that you follow this particular workflow. Then an intermediate kind of solution that you're probably also already familiar with is what we refer to as AI-driven automation. And what we are doing in these kinds of workflows is that we are embedding a specific AI component, but still within a traditional workflow. One of the most common examples of that is to use scanning approaches like an OCR scanner, or using a single machine learning algorithm like a classification algorithm into a workflow. Now, the main point of how you can recognize whether something is AI-driven automation or agentic AI is that this is still very much deterministic in nature. If you are starting at the same point, you will always get the same outcome whenever you are running this typical kind of workflow. And this is where agentic AI becomes different and agentic automation becomes different, is that in the last part, the decision will be made by an AI action, and that AI agent can invoke different workflows, but it can also take different actions based on the situation or based on the context of an organization. And the way that you can really think about this is that suppose that you have a workflow, then the agent can make a different decision in the morning than it might take in the afternoon based on changing circumstances, or it might provide a different answer based on a particular profile. So where an AI agent is really different from the previous two parts is that the outcome is non-deterministic, and it's based on the context, moment in time, and information that is being provided to the agent up front. And that's why we like to refer to this as autonomous decision-making, because just as people take decisions typically based on their context and based on their experience at a specific moment in time, the agent does the exact same thing. So just to summarize the slide a little bit, because this is, I would say, very critical to understand. The first and second situations are, even though they are using some AI components, are deterministic, whereas with agentic automation, the outcome is not necessarily deterministic in nature. And that's a very critical thing to take into account. Now, what does that mean? So if we look at a deterministic robot versus a completely autonomous agent and look at the level of control, then you can say that with agentic automation, we're really trying to elevate the level of reliability in applications, so that we still want to make sure that the outcomes are in line with company policy, but we are just shifting the knowledge from completely autonomous towards something that is useful and usable within an organization. So the end goal of these kinds of solutions is to ensure that we create and develop agents that are in controlled environments, and that the agent also acts and make decisions within the boundaries, policies, and limits that the organization is comfortable with. So you don't want an agent to make any kind of decision. You would like to train it into such a way that it will make choices from a number of potential outcomes or potential decisions that the agent is able to make. So that's exactly the challenge that most organizations are currently in, and leads to the questions on how you can establish and get this started. Good. So I know we're going through the time very, very quickly today. So I'm hoping that so far you have understood a little bit better around what RPA is, and now understand the underlying components that are driving RPA solutions. And it's fair to say that RPA is a fascinating technology. And the thing that I really personally very much like about it is that it delivers real business results. So automating processes means that you can do things faster, better, cheaper, and therefore it has real world significant business impact. Now, this is only going to become even more interesting because we can now use agents and generative AI in that mix as well. And that has the potential not just to leverage the capabilities of AI that everyone is using and talking about, but to also do that at a scale and at a speed that we've not seen before. So one of the main things I hope you really take away from today's session is that the combination of RPA and generative AI technologies leads to agentic automation solutions, and that these agentic automation solutions have very strong and very significant business impact. And that has the potential to use AI at a scale that you've probably never seen before. And it's my strong opinion that everyone in the IT domain should know a little bit more about this, because it's significantly transforming the way that organizations act, but also the benefits that you can get out of your process organization. Good. So then let me go towards the last part of today's session. Why then do certification and learn a little bit more about this? And with the Data Science Institute, we have today 2 certifications available. The original certification is the Service Automation Foundation course, which I've not talked about today. But the other one, which is more recent, is the RPA Foundation credential. So if you're interested in learning more about today's topic, or you've seen something that really triggered your interest, then I strongly encourage you to check out this certification, because it really covers and goes beyond the basics and explains a lot of the topics that we've just very briefly touched upon today. So note that this is a full course. There is also an APMG certification around this, and you can get certified in RPA Foundation. So I strongly encourage you to check out the website, learn more about the certification, and obviously either sign up for a course or sign up for the e-learning, because this is really a very fundamental and interesting technology. Good. I see that I've just remained within the time set, so I think we still have time to look at a very few questions. So if you have any questions for me, please feel free to post them in the chat, and I will have a quick look at moderating everything. Good. First question is, will this presentation be shared? The answer is yes. I hope I explained this a little bit. Yes, everyone who has participated will receive a copy of the presentation. And if you haven't received it, you can always send me a message. The next question is, what do you recommend organizations balance short-term cost savings with long-term sustainability when rolling out RPA? It's actually quite a good question. So thanks so much for that. My main point, my main response is going to be, it should always be long-term. So you don't just do RPA for a short-term cost-saving opportunity. Yes, there will be cost savings, and yes, it will make things more efficient, but that is not the goal in itself. The goal in itself is to have to make productivity better, to speed up products to market, make sure that there's a better customer experience. Those should be the drivers from an automation or intelligent automation kind of solution, and not just around the cost aspect. So my main advice would be to kind of always keep the longer term perspective into consideration. Next question, as an RPA developer, what skills should I have with the emergence of agentic AI, and which courses should I take? Well, skills, I think, are very similar to what you would need in any kind of workflow or automation part. So a lot of, I would say, analysis skills. Business processes are the fundament, and remember the slide that I started with. Ultimately, it's about process understanding, and then as soon as you have that, you can move further to understanding the technology necessary to build the workflows. But having a sound understanding of what workflows are accomplishing, how the business process works, that's really the starting point. The next question on the slide, a distinction is made between robots and agents. Can you expand on how organizations should decide when to use traditional RPA versus agentic AI? Oh, that's actually quite an interesting question. I would say if the outcome is deterministic in nature, so you know that the outcome is either going to be black or white, then RPA is going to be more than sufficient. Where agents are very useful is if you have multiple options to choose from, and you don't always know what the input variables are going to be. So what do I mean with that is, suppose that the end result should be recommendation of a color. So let's say not just black and white, but orange and gray and green and blue, but that you don't necessarily know who is going to be asking the question. So if you ask a question like determine somebody's favorite color, then depending on who's asking it, what the profile of that person will be, what information you have around that person, the outcome can be different. So somebody's favorite color could be purple, another person's can be green. So even though the workflow is the same, it will lead to different recommendations and different scenarios based on the context that you're asking. So I hope that kind of explains it a little bit more in detail. Good, so let me see if there's any other questions. I think that this is most of it. Yes, I see that these are all the questions that were asked today. With that, I would like to thank everyone again for joining today's session. It's always a real pleasure to host these things. So thank you so much for attending one of our DASCIN webinars. In case you're interested, keep an eye on the calendar and keep being informed by the newsletter. We host these sessions periodically on different themes and topics that we see within the data community. So I hope I will see you again on any of our upcoming sessions. Thanks so much for watching today, and until we meet again.